You found the lanyard in my glove box, Claire. That's what started this. You were looking for a charger and you pulled out a laminated badge with my photo on it and the words Silver Line Car Service across the top, and you just stood there in the driveway holding it like it was a body. You asked me how long. That's a fair question. Let me tell you how long and why, and what it had to do with a phone call I was never supposed to hear. It started about 14 months before your wedding was supposed to happen. I'm Marion Vance. I was an ER nurse for 31 years at Cedar County General, and when I retired, everyone in this family decided that meant I was supposed to become a houseplant. Sit in the sun. Water twice a week. Don't move too much. You meant well, honey, you and your brother both. But I want you to understand, nobody asked me if I wanted to stop moving. I just stopped being asked. So I signed up to drive for the car service without telling anyone. Not because I needed the money, though it didn't hurt, but because I needed somewhere to put 31 years of paying close attention to people. You don't unlearn that. You spend 3 decades reading a person's face for the thing they're not saying, and then you retire, and suddenly nobody wants you reading anything anymore. Driving gave me somewhere to point all that noticing. Strangers in the back seat, telling me things they'd never tell their own families. I liked it. I was good at it. You're looking at me like you want me to get to Grant. I will. But you need the life before, first, or none of the rest makes sense. I want to be honest about what our family looked like before all this. Not cruel, just arranged in a way that left me a little outside the frame. Your father passed 6 years ago, and after that, the house got quieter, and you and your brother Theo started managing me instead of talking to me. Little things. You'd call to check I'd eaten. Theo started CCing me on emails meant for people who needed reminders. Nobody was unkind. They were just already grieving me a little while I was still standing right there. And then Grant Ashworth came into the picture. Grant, your fiancé, 29 years old, sharp suits, an associate at a private equity firm downtown, the kind of young man who shakes hands like he's closing on a house. He was polished. He complimented my roast chicken. He called me Mrs. Vance in a way that sounded respectful and somehow also sounded like he was filing me under a category. I didn't dislike him at first. I want to be fair about that. I just noticed things. The way he'd redirect a conversation the second it wasn't about him or his plans. The way he asked you, more than once at that dinner table, whether you'd thought about scaling back once you two were settled. Your job, Claire, the one you built from an internship into a director title in 6 years. I filed it away. That's the thing about 31 years in an ER. You learn to keep a running ledger in your head. Not accusations, just observations, stacked quietly, waiting to see if a pattern showed up. One comment about you scaling back wasn't a pattern. It was a data point. Then I started driving him. It was an accident, genuinely. The app just matched me to a rider one Tuesday morning. A recurring pickup, 7:15 a.m., corner of Del Mar and 9th, drop-off at a glass building downtown. I pulled up and there he was, Grant, on his phone, not even glancing at the driver before he got in. Sunglasses, earbuds half in. He said the address like he was ordering coffee and went right back to his call. He did not recognize me. And I understood immediately why, because at your house, at our dinners, I am Claire's mother, dressed for the occasion, hair done, a person situated inside a family context he'd already decided he understood. In the driver's seat, in a baseball cap, with my badge clipped to the visor, I wasn't a person he'd cataloged at all. I was upholstery, a means of transportation. I found that useful. I'm not proud of finding it useful, but I did. I didn't tell you. I didn't tell Theo. I certainly didn't tell Grant. I just kept driving him. Some weeks twice, some weeks 4 times, whenever the app happened to line us up, and a few times when I noticed his ride request pop up and I angled myself toward it on purpose, which I'll admit now was no longer an accident. You just shifted in your seat. I see that. You want to know what I heard. I'm getting there, but I need you to understand what those months of quiet mornings taught me first, because the call didn't come out of nowhere. It came at the end of a pattern I'd already half built. Grant took calls in my car like the driver's seat was a wall, not a person. Over those months, I heard him negotiate a lease renewal, complain about a colleague named Dale Whitfield, his business partner at the firm, a man he clearly both needed and resented, and rehearse, more than once, a version of a conversation he seemed to be preparing to have with you. I remember one morning specifically. He was talking to his mother, I think, and he said, "She doesn't need to keep the job once we're married. Mom, that's the whole point of doing this properly. Once we're married. That's the whole point of doing this properly. I added it to the ledger. Line 2. I told myself it wasn't my business. You were 31 years old, Claire, sharp as anything, a grown woman who had never once needed me to fight her battles. I raised you to make your own decisions, and part of loving you the way I tried to was staying out of your relationship, even when something in it made the hair on my arm stand up. So I drove him to work in silence, dozens of mornings, holding my tongue and holding the ledger, telling myself the pattern still hadn't proven anything solid enough to hand you. Then came the Tuesday in March, 6 weeks before the wedding. I picked him up at the usual corner. He got in already mid-conversation, phone pressed to his ear, and this time it was Dale. I recognized the name from the earlier calls, the business partner, and this time Grant wasn't performing for his mother. He was talking business, low and fast, the way people talk when they think no one in the room actually counts as a person who's listening. He told Dale that the post-nup was drafted and that the trick was timing. Get married first, let the goodwill settle, then bring it to you framed as just formalizing what we already agreed on, so you'd sign without your lawyer really combing through it. He said something I will never forget, word for word, because I have replayed it so many times it's worn smooth like a stone. Once we're married, the trust conversation gets a lot easier. She doesn't even know what's coming to her from her dad's side, and by the time she does, my name's already on the paperwork. Your father's side, Claire. Your father, who has been gone 6 years, who left you something in a trust you weren't set to hear about until you turned 35, something I knew about because I was the executor, something Grant should not have known about at all. I want you to understand what that moment did in my chest, sitting there at a red light with my hands on the wheel, a man I'd been quietly, politely chauffeuring for months suddenly revealing, in real time, that he already had a plan for money that wasn't even his to plan for, money you didn't know about yet, attached to a father you were still grieving. I did not say a word. I dropped him at the glass building like always. He tipped me $2 and never looked at my face. And then I sat in that parking garage for 11 minutes before I could make my hands stop shaking enough to drive. I called Theo first, not you. I needed to hear it out loud to someone before I brought it anywhere near your wedding planning, because I knew the second I said it to you, there'd be no undoing it. Theo went quiet on the phone the way your father used to go quiet, the kind of quiet that means someone's doing arithmetic with their jaw clenched. He said, "Mom, are you sure it was him? Are you sure it wasn't just deal talk, work stuff?" I understood the instinct. Nobody wants to be the reason a wedding falls apart over something they half-heard through a car speaker. That's the part that almost stopped me, because half-heard was fair. I'd built a ledger, yes, but a ledger built entirely out of overheard fragments isn't proof, it's suspicion with good posture. If I brought it to you and I was wrong, or even partly wrong, I would have detonated something in your life on the strength of my own eavesdropping, and I would never fully trust my own judgment again, let alone expect you to. So I didn't come to you yet. I went to Dale Whitfield instead. I want to tell you honestly, I did not expect that to work. Dale was a name on the other end of a phone, a man I'd never met, Grant's business partner, and, from what I'd overheard in scraps over the months, someone who seemed tired in a way that had nothing to do with ours. I found his office number through the firm's website and I called. And I said I was Claire Vance's mother and I needed 15 minutes, and something in my voice must have carried, because he gave them to me the next morning. Dale was maybe 35, tired-eyed, a coffee stain on his cuff, and when I told him what I'd overheard in the car, he didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who'd been waiting a long time for someone to finally ask him the right question. He told me this wasn't the first post-nup Grant had drafted before a wedding. There'd been a fiancé before you, 2 years back, a woman named Priya, and the engagement had ended, Dale's word, abruptly, right around the time Priya's family lawyers started asking about a similar document. Dale still had the old draft on a shared firm server, filed under a client code, never fully deleted because Grant hadn't thought anyone else would ever go looking. He printed it for me. Both drafts, side by side. The one for Priya, 2 years old, and the one for you, 6 weeks new. Nearly identical in structure. Same clauses, same timing language about waiting until after the ceremony. That was the proof the ledger had been missing, not my memory of a car ride. A paper trail, held the whole time by a man who'd been quietly ashamed of his part in it, waiting for someone to ask. I drove home with that folder on the passenger seat like it was something alive. I still didn't come to you that night. I sat with it one more day because I wanted to bring you something you could hold, not just something your mother swore she'd overheard from the front seat of a rideshare. I wanted you to be able to read it yourself, in your own two hands, at your own pace, without my voice shaping how you felt about it before you'd even finished the first page. I asked you to come by for dinner. You remember this part. You thought I was being strange, too quiet while I cooked, and you were right. I was terrified. I put the folder on the kitchen table between us before we even sat down, and I said, I need you to read this before you eat anything, and I need you to know I did not want to be the one showing it to you. Then I told you about the driving, and the badge, and the months of silent mornings, and the call at the red light, and Dale's office, and Priya. You didn't cry right away. You went very still, the way you used to as a little girl when something surprised you too much to have a reaction ready. You read both drafts twice. And then you asked me one question, and it wasn't about Grant at all. You asked, how long have you been driving strangers around and just not telling us? And I understood then that some part of what hurt you that night wasn't only Grant. It was realizing your mother had built a whole quiet life I hadn't let you see, right alongside the family that thought it already had me fully mapped. I'm not going to walk you back through the 6 weeks after that, the calls to your lawyer, the very calm, very final conversation you had with Grant in his own apartment with your brother waiting in the car outside in case you needed him, the wedding that never happened, the deposits you lost and didn't care about losing. You lived that part. You don't need it narrated back to you by the woman who caused it. What I will say is this, and I know we've mostly talked around it until tonight, until that lanyard fell out of my glove box and made you finally ask. Losing that wedding was not the thing that changed our family. What changed it was you finding out I still had a whole self nobody had bothered to ask about. And once that was out in the open, we stopped managing each other and started actually talking. Theo calls me now to ask what I think, not to remind me to eat. You call me to tell me about your work, the real version, not the version edited down for someone you think can't handle complexity anymore. I still drive, by the way, not because I need to hide anywhere anymore. You know now, everyone knows now, but because I still like it. I like strangers who don't know my whole story yet, who just get in and tell me theirs. So, you asked me how long I'd been driving him without saying a word. The honest answer is, long enough to learn exactly who he was, and not 1 minute longer than it took to be sure. I would do it again, every quiet morning of it, if it meant you got to find out the truth on a night I chose, at a table I set, instead of on some morning 6 months into a marriage when it would have cost you everything instead of just a deposit. That's the whole story, Claire. That's why the badge was in the glove box. If someone in your own life has been quietly underestimated the way I was, a parent, a grandparent, anyone the family stopped asking real questions of, maybe tonight's the night you ask them one. You might be surprised what they've been carrying. And if this story moved you, tell it in the comments, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.